I am going to start tonight by acknowledging country. Glossy Black Conservancy and BirdLife Australia would like to acknowledge Australia's First Nations people and the lands on which we come from tonight. I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and to any First Nations people who are joining us on this webinar tonight. I would also like to acknowledge the very real and enduring contribution that Australia's First Nations people make in terms of knowledge and conservation of Australia's birds and other wildlife and our landscape and culture. I am coming to you from the Gold Coast, which is the country of the Kumbermeri families of the Yugambeh language region, and I would like to invite you to acknowledge country in the chat if you would like to do that. So thank you all very much for joining us tonight. My name is Samantha Morris. I am representing the Glossy Black Conservancy this evening in terms of facilitating this workshop, but this workshop is a collaboration between the Glossy Black Conservancy and also BirdLife Australia. For those of you who don't know, the Glossy Black Conservancy is a newly incorporated association, which is a collaboration between researchers, not-for-profit groups, state government agency in Australia, and private individuals who are passionate about the conservation of glossy black cockatoos and their habitat. So the order of events tonight is very straightforward. We will have a 20-minute presentation from Dr Daniella Teixeira and some opportunities for you to ask questions in the Q&A function or in the chat. We will then screen 2 short videos that go for a total of 15 minutes combined, which will give you information on how to register for the Great Glossy Count and how to select a site, as well as how to log your sightings in bird data. So if you have participated in the Great Glossy Count or a Glossy Black Birding Day in the past, the process for choosing a site this year is a little bit different and much simpler. You'll love it. After that, we're going to have a panel discussion with 3 guests. And once again, the panel will be answering your questions. So I invite you to ask those in the Q&A function or the chat. Any questions we don't get to tonight, we will cover on the Glossy Black Conservancy Facebook page in coming weeks. And Elli has just popped the link to the Glossy Black Conservancy Facebook page in the chat. Before I introduce you to Dr. Daniella Teixeira, I would like to remind you, considering that most of you hopefully will be registering to participate in the Great Glossy Count, of the importance of your safety in the field. So we know that many of you are very experienced when it comes to spending time outdoors and observing wildlife. And it's because of that that you'll appreciate how critical it is for us to run through some basic safety for our newer volunteers. And of course, a refresher for everybody to remain safe in the field is useful, no matter how much experience you have. So your number one priority, if you participate in the Great Glossy Count, is your personal safety. And we have some strategies for ensuring you have a good time on the day and remain safe in the field. If you'd like to read more about safety in the field, BirdLife Australia has a risk assessment document, which you can view on their website. And once again, Elli is going to pop that in the chat for you. So in terms of your personal safety, please follow these instructions. Obey all restrictions and follow current health advice. For your safety, we recommend that you work with a friend or in a group. Do not venture out solo, and tell someone where you're going, and check in when you return home safely. Carry a mobile phone with you as well as a power bank. Not only is this useful for navigation and photos, but it will be critical for logging data in bird data. If you are traveling to a remote area, it's astute to take an EPIRB or a satellite phone. As with all outdoor activities, dress appropriately by wearing closed-in shoes, a long-sleeve top, long pants, hat, and sun protection. Wear insect repellent with at least 30% DEET and check it's not past its expiry date. Take plenty of drinking water and stay hydrated. Watch for hazards that pose a threat to your personal safety, which of course may include dangerous wildlife. Carry a first aid kit and snake bandages and know how to use them. Be aware of extreme weather warnings in your area and consider the likelihood of fire, flood, heavy winds, lightning or storms that may impact your safety. In case of emergency, please call 000. There are also strategies you can take for managing risks on site and minimising risks to your safety in the natural environment. To do this, you should be aware of your surroundings and you can visually survey your site for any risks to your safety, which might include roads and traffic, uneven or unstable ground, exposure to sun or wind, snakes, spiders, and other wildlife, including mosquitoes, and getting lost. So familiarise yourself with your allocated site, know your entry and exit points, and identify the nearest facilities and landmarks such as restrooms, service stations, or major roads. Keep track of where you are and where you started. You can use a map, GPS, compass, or the Bird Data app, which you'll hear more about shortly, to record where you started your count and to keep track of which direction you are travelling in. Stay out of water bodies, and if you have driven to your location, make sure to lock your car before you head out and keep your car keys in a safe place so they don't get lost while you are collecting data. So thank you for bearing with us while we went through those essential safety messages. I know that you didn't come here to listen to me. I would like to introduce Dr. Daniella Teixeira. Daniella is our accidental pinup girl, we call her, for Glossy Black-Cockatoos. After Danny's presentation, we're going to watch 2 short videos of how to register for the count and select a site and how to record your sightings. Danny is going to guide us through the key points of identifying glossy black cockatoos and their habitat and how to tell them apart from other black cockatoos. You can ask questions anytime in the chat and we'll either answer them live or ask them of the panel after we hear from Danny. So about Danny. Danny, you can get your PowerPoint ready while I introduce you if you like. Dr. Daniella is a conservation scientist whose research focuses on species monitoring to improve conservation outcomes. Danny completed her PhD at the University of Queensland, where she researched bioacoustic methods to monitor breeding in glossy black cockatoos on Kangaroo Island and red-tailed black cockatoos in Victoria. More recently, Daniella has been working on bushfire impacts to glossy black cockatoos, acoustic monitoring of frogs, and malleefowl monitoring for the National Malleefowl Recovery Team. Daniella is a very highly respected member of the Glossy Black Conservancy, and she's been involved for more than 5 years. She's become the accidental face of glossy black cockatoo conservation in Australia, having appeared in a number of small production documentaries and educational videos, as well as a Netflix documentary hosted by none other than David Attenborough. Daniella is so generous with her time when it comes to conservation projects, especially glossy conservation. So please welcome Dr. Daniella. Over to you, Danny.
Thanks, Sam. That was a lot. Thank you. That was a wonderful introduction. And yeah, just while we're on this chat, I also want to put a big shout out to Mike, who's online today, and he'll be in our Q&A panel later on. I was a fresh PhD student at the start of 2016. I knew nothing about glossy black cockatoos, and I went down to Kangaroo Island, and everything I know almost I learned from Mike. So ask him all of your hard questions later on. So yeah, today this will be a fairly quick presentation. It'll just be going through how to ID glossies and their habitat in the field. And yeah, like Sam said, just pop any questions that you have into the Q&A and we'll try and get to those in a little bit. So there's 5 species of black cockatoos in Australia, and the glossy black cockatoo is one of those. It's the smallest and the quietest. So there's a little bit of conjecture around how many species of black cockatoos, but when we talk about black cockatoos, we tend to mean the glossies, of course, red-tailed black cockatoos, yellow-tailed black cockatoos, and then over in WA, we've got the 2 white-tailed black cockatoo species, so the Carnabies and the Bodans. So those are the 5 black cockatoo species. We also, of course, have the palm cockatoo, gang cockatoo, and those sorts of things, which, of course, are sort of black and they're cockatoos, but taxonomically speaking, we think of them slightly differently. But you don't need to worry about any of that. So we do have 3 subspecies of glossy black cockatoo, which if you look at that map down the bottom, you can see. So on the East Coast, we have 2 subspecies of glossy black cockatoo, the northern subspecies, which occurs sort of from central Queensland up to around Townsville. And then the southeastern subspecies, which is the focus of this talk, which is from about central Queensland down into northeast Victoria. And that subspecies has the widest distribution, as you can see there. We then have a tiny little isolated subspecies down on Kangaroo Island in South Australia, which is where I had the huge privilege of conducting my PhD research under the mentorship of Mike. So actually, I guess a little thing that we may get into a little bit later on is perhaps that subspecies should now be called the South Australian subspecies, because a couple of individuals have flown over to the mainland again, which is something that hasn't happened in literally decades. So they may no longer be confined to Kangaroo Island in a few years, which would be wonderful. Glossy Black-Cockatoos are threatened right across their range. If you've kept up with the Glossy Black-Cockatoo news, not that there's, you know, too much in the mainstream media, but a really significant outcome about a year ago was that the southeastern subspecies was federally listed under the EPBC Act as a threatened species. And that is a result of the amount of habitat that was lost in those really significant bushfires in 2019, 2020. So really, really large areas of habitat were lost, particularly in New South Wales, but also in Victoria and here in Southeast Queensland, where I'm based. And that was sufficient enough for that to actually become now a federally listed threatened species, which brings with it, hopefully, some more protection. The reason why Glossy Black-Cockatoos are so threatened is, of course, decades of habitat loss, degradation, and all of the things that threaten most of the wildlife here in Australia. But Glossy Black-Cockatoos are particularly vulnerable because they're this really long-lived species with a really low reproductive rate. So they only have one egg every 1 to 2 years, probably fairly low survival rates, though we don't fully understand that. And this is partly driven by their really specialized diet. So we'll get into this in a little bit, but they only eat seeds from she oak trees. And that basically means that they can't produce all that many young. There's a lot we don't know about Glossy Black-Cockatoos, which is partly why we're running these sorts of days. So where do they occur? What are their movements? Like, how do they use the landscapes? Where do they breed? We don't even fully understand that. And then, of course, what are the impacts of fire, drought, climate change, and those sorts of things? So I won't be going into the details of that, but these are some of the questions that researchers like myself like to investigate. So across the range where we'll be conducting this Great Glossy Count, there's really three species of black cockatoo that you need to be able to identify. So this map isn't the best, but basically we've got the Glossy Black Cockatoos distribution in the grey, and then overlapping that you can see the yellow squiggly line. That is the distribution of the yellow-tailed black cockatoo. That's the main species that is likely to cause confusion. You may come across red-tailed black cockatoos depending where you are, but they're a lot rarer across most of the Glossy Black Cockatoos range. So you don't need to probably worry about them as much. However, visually, they are the most similar to Glossy Black Cockatoos. So it's still important that you can tell those apart. So this is what the three species look like. These are actually all males of those species. And that's because the males, particularly of the red tails and the glossies you can see there, are the most similar and the most likely to cause confusion. The yellowtails are on the left there. And like I said, they're the ones whose distribution overlaps mostly with the Glossy Black Cockatoo, but they do look quite different once you know what to look for instance, they have these yellow or sort of creamy colored tail feathers. Once you kind of pay attention to those features, you'll be able to separate them quite easily. And that's the most important thing that you need to take away from this presentation. But I'll go through this in a bit more detail in a few slides. So this is a close-up of Glossy Black Cockatoo. So this is a pair. We've got the male there on the left and the female on the right. So Glossy Black Cockatoos tend to have this, you know, sort of black all over, sort of dusty browny black body color, depending on the light. They're not quite as black and shiny as red-tailed black cockatoos, which is interesting because they're called the Glossy Black Cockatoos. But yeah, so they're sort of this browny black all over, and the adult males have these bright red, solid bands in their tail feathers that you can see in that photo there. And the females are similar, but they have this really distinctive yellow feathering all over their head. And in their tail feathers, it's not the best photo here, the tail feathers are also like a red or a reddish orange, but they have black stripes or black bars through their tail feathers. So that's how you can tell the males and the females apart from each other. They have a bit of a harsh call. I don't know if harsh is the right description, but that's often how it's described. So I'll just play a little clip of what their call sounds like now. So that's the kind of call that you'll hear if you're out in the field, if they're feeding and potentially moving around. That's sort of like flight calls and a few contact calls in there. So it's that kind of drawn out, longer sort of call. But like I said, glossy black cockatoos, they're not as noisy as other cockatoos. So they definitely are the smallest and the quietest of all the black cockatoos. But you won't kind of see them in these really large, raucous flocks that you do with the other black cockatoo species. And if you think of any cockatoos, like any of the white cockatoos, we often hear them in these like really loud, screechy, massive flocks that just kind of take over. But glossies, you don't tend to see that. They tend to be in smaller flocks or just, you know, trios or pairs, and they're not all that noisy. This is yellow-tailed black cockatoos, and I just have a photo here of a male. The male and the female look very, very similar. The only thing really that separates them is that the males have this sort of pink around their eye, and the females don't have that. But for all intents and purposes, when you're out in the field, you're probably not going to be looking that closely anyway. But the main thing to look for is, like I said in the previous image, they have this kind of yellowy, creamy color in their tail feathers, but they also have this really distinctive yellow cheek patch, and that is consistent across all individuals. So if you see a large black bird with a single yellow cheek patch on either cheek, that's going to be a yellow-tailed black cockatoo. And this species does sort of flock up in larger flocks, and they do tend to call all over the top of one another. So you do get that kind of cacophony of sound. They'll feed on a whole range of different plants as well. So while glossies are really specialized, yellow-tailed black cockatoos are nowhere near as specialized. They will eat introduced species as well, like pine. Their flight call is amazing. I absolutely love this sound. If any of you have seen them in the field, you've probably heard this call, but it's this beautiful high pitch that is, like a wailing kind of sound that goes up and then down in pitch. And it's really quite distinctive. It sounds very similar to the white-tailed black cockatoos in WA because that's their closest relative. But we don't have those species here. So it's just yellowtails. If you hear this sound, it's going to be yellowtails. So I'll play that call now. And then lastly, we have the red-tailed black cockatoos. So like yellowtails, this species flocks up into large flocks. They can be super noisy while they're feeding, lots of screeching and carrying on, and all the typical kind of cockatoo behaviors. But this species is far less likely to be in the distribution where glossy black cockatoos are. So, you know, if you can separate that the bird is not a yellow-tailed black cockatoo, it's probably going to be a glossy, but it's still important to be able to tell red-tails apart because, if you're sort of further west and in places where red-tails occur, it can be a little bit tricky to tell them apart because the males look very, very similar in some ways. So in that image there on the left, that's the male red-tailed black cockatoo. And you can see like glossies, they're black all over. They're slightly blacker and shinier in a way, a bit sort of iridescent in the right light. And they have this really large crest. So all cockatoos have crests, but glossy's crests is actually quite small. But the red-tailed black cockatoos have these really, really large crests when they put them up. So photo like that shows that really well in both the male and the female. The males do have solid red tail feathers as well. So again, they look very similar to glossies, but the females look very different. So you can see there on the right, the female red tail has just spots all over her, like sort of like a constellation of stars. They're absolutely beautiful. And they have all of this scalloping, banding across their chest and on their wings. So glossy females tend not to have that when they're mature. They'll kind of just be black all over with blotches of yellow on their head. But you can generally tell them apart. You know, you're either looking at the females. Are they in really large, noisy flocks feeding in, say, eucalypts, something like that, which, you know, glossies don't feed in eucalypts. So that's another way to tell them apart. And yeah, their distribution doesn't overlap all that much. So there's a few key things that you can look out for in trying to separate those species. And this is just a great photo of a female glossy in flight. So you can see she's got, a black body all over, blotchy yellow on her face. And then her tail feathers have this orangey, yellowy kind of color with those black bars in there. This is just like a little trick, or not a trick, but just to kind of point out that glossy black cockatoo females can be very variable in their plumage. So this photo, you might look at her head and think, okay, that's a male, but there's two things that point out that this is a female. She does actually have a tiny little fleck of yellow on her cheek. You can just see that. I didn't take this photo, so I'm not sure what the other side of this Glossy's face looked like, but maybe there's more yellow there, which would be telltale. But the most important thing here is to look at those tail feathers. So she's got a lot of yellow in her tail, and adult males don't have any yellow in their tail feathers. Juvenile males will have some of that black barring in their tail feathers, but they won't have this yellow and orange and kind of mixture. It'll just be this kind of solid red color. So that's how we know that this is a female. The juvenile males are a really interesting category of glossy because we don't tend to see juvenile females by themselves. So we always talk about juvenile birds or subadult birds tend to be male, which sounds quite interesting because they often flock up together. These are sort of males that don't yet have a female mate, whereas female glossies tend to kind of be snapped up by a male very, very quickly. And Mike has some anecdotes from Kangaroo Island about that. But these flocks of juvenile males, we sort of call them bachelor flocks sometimes. They can be quite large. These birds do have their adult male plumage over their body, so they're all black. They don't have any of their, fledgling, really young plumage, but they still have these stripes in their tail feathers. So they've got the red tail feathers like the adult males, but they do have these black bars through their tail feathers. So they won't have any yellow, they won't have any orange. It's going to be a very kind of bright red kind of color. The bars also, to my eye at least, tend to look a lot thicker and more defined than the bars that you see in female tail feathers. And that's probably a bit of an age thing. We know as birds get older, the bars thin out a little bit. And this is a fledgling. So fledgling glossies have sort of this irregular spots and bands across their body. They haven't yet developed their adult plumage. So there's no like solid patches of yellow if this were a female. They've kind of maintained the scalloping down their chest and those sorts of things. So if you see a bird that is sort of like irregular and spots and scallops and whatever, that's probably going to be a fledgling based on plumage. They also do have the bars in their tail, whether that's male or female, they will have those black bars. But really the best way to tell if a bird is a fledgling is that it's going to act like a young child. It's dependent on its parents, so it will be close to its parents. It will be clumsy, it will be trying to feed itself, but maybe not really doing a good job. It will be begging. It may sort of be flapping its wings, but just kind of mucking around a little bit. I think that just the best way to think of them is super clumsy as they learn how to be a cockatoo. It's super cute. Sometimes you will see them trying to feed themselves, but they may kind of attempt it and then drop the cone to the ground because they don't quite know what to do with it. So these are the really young birds, like they've come out of the nest in this past breeding season. And because this Great Glossy Count is happening in September, that will be just after the breeding season has finished. So you may actually see a few of these. And this is a trio. I absolutely love this photo. So up the back, we've got the adult male. You can see him there with his full black body and red tail feathers. Down the front there, we've got the female with quite a lot of yellow over her head. And then in the center there, we've got the fledgling with all of those spots over its body. And you can see it has got a cone in its claw, so it's practicing how to eat. All right, in terms of feed trees, so like I said earlier, glossy black cockatoos are she oak specialists. So there's a whole range of she oak trees across their distribution. So I won't be able to go through all of those species. There's a couple of key ones that they feed on. But if you kind of just know how to identify she oak trees generally, that would be a good way for you to then go and look for evidence that glossies have been feeding there. So she oaks, or casuarinas, sometimes they're called as well. They're really characteristics. They're widely distributed trees with these needle-like leaves. So yeah, once you know what they are, you can't unsee it basically. A really cool thing about these trees is that they have male and females. So it's only the female trees that actually produce the cones that the glossies eat. So you may see she oak trees that are covered in sort of like a rusty pollen kind of color. Those are actually the male trees. So they don't provide any food source for the glossy black cockatoos. It's only these female trees that produce these cones. And this is what a she oak forest can look like. These are two species, black she oak and forest she oak, that occur where I'm based, up in southeast Queensland. But like I said, there's a whole range of different species, and they can occur in mixed forests, mixed woodlands. They can occur on the coast, in a whole range of areas. And glossies will feed on quite a lot of different species of them. When glossies feed on she oak cones, they leave behind this really telltale sign that they've been there. Basically, once they chew up the cones, they drop all the bits to the ground. And if they like that tree, they will feed on it extensively, and there'll be a lot of this chewing matter on the ground. So we call that feeding evidence or feeding sign. And then colloquially, we call that chewings, or orts is something else that we call it up here in Queensland. But basically, it just looks like chewed up bits all over the ground. And I think, yeah, when I started doing this work, I could never quite get my head around how you would actually see that out in the field. But honestly, once you do get your eye into it, it's really quite conspicuous. And as you're out and about, you know, this is something I do now all the time, but I'm out and about and I see a she oak tree, I just automatically look under it. And if I see something, I'll go and have a look and go, oh, okay, I think that's probably glossies. And there's a few different ways you can tell whether chewings are from glossies or from some of the other parrots, for instance. But yeah, most of the time, if you do have your eye in, you can be pretty confident that you're identifying a glossy feed tree. And something that's really neat about these chewings or this feeding sign is that they do change color as they age. So the fresher they are, the more lighter in color they are. So they can be like a whitish, creamy, greeny sort of color. And that probably means that glossies have been feeding on them that day or within the last couple of days. As sort of the weeks go on, those chewings will change to like a reddish brown and then eventually into a gray. So we can actually get some kind of like temporal information from the color of the chewings. And this is just sort of what they look like. In that photo on the left, I just put a pen there for scale. But these are fairly fresh. You can see they're sort of that like orangey, creamy kind of color. So they probably weren't fresh the day that I came across them, but they probably were in the last couple of weeks. And this is, yeah, a forest she oak that I found some glossies in up in, I think that was Springbrook National Park on the Gold Coast. And that's just a photo of them in my hand, so you can kind of see the general size of the bits that the glossies leave behind. All right, that was really speedy. Thank you so much for listening. Hopefully I stuck to my 20 minutes, Sam. But yeah, if we have questions about any of the species ID, happy to take them whenever is appropriate. Thank you.
Yep, so if you do have questions for Dr. Danny, please pop them in the chat and we will pass those on. And as Danny said, that was a lot of information in a really short period of time. And we're aware of that. Danny's got years and years experience identifying glossy black cockatoos. And it's completely unrealistic that you would be able to identify glossy black cockatoos based on a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation. But don't sweat it, because we've got some great resources to help you identify glossy black cockatoos after this workshop. And we've popped two of those links in the chat. So one is a field guide to glossies, and another is a really comprehensive identification video, which is on YouTube. And both of those resources were produced by the Glossy Black Conservancy and BirdLife Australia last year. So please take some time to review those. We have got some questions coming in. They're not specifically related to identification, Danny, so we might leave them for the panel. While Elli is just teeing up the additional videos which are coming up, so we're going to screen two videos. The first, combined, they go for about 15 minutes. The first is how to register and select a site for the count. And the second is how to log your sightings on bird data on your mobile phone. So if you participated in the Great Glossy Count last year, you will remember that in Queensland and Northern New South Wales, you were allocated a site. This year, you can use bird data to actually choose a site that is convenient to you. And we've prioritised those sites based on where we know there is habitat to increase the chances of you actually seeing a glossy. So Elli, how are we going with the video? Oh, beautiful. So go ahead, Elli.
Welcome to BirdLife Australia's video guide on how to register and book a site in bird data for the Great Glossy Count. Step 1. Log in or sign up to bird data. Firstly, you will need to go to the correct link to get to the registration page. You can go to bit.ly/GlossyCount2023, which will take you directly to the registration page, or you can go to bit.ly/GlossyCount, which has all the information you need on the Great Glossy Count. From this page, you can click on Register and book a site for the Great Glossy Count. If you are not already logged into bird data, you will be prompted to log in or create a new account. Type in your details and click Login. If you are already logged into bird data when you go to bit.ly/GlossyCount2023, or when you click the Register and Book a Site for the Great Glossy Count button, this will automatically take you to the registration page where you can manage your registration and site bookings. From here, you can implement Step 2, Register. To register, all you need to do is click the Register button. Read the text and confirm if you would like to register. You can cancel your registration at any time by clicking Cancel Registration. Read the text and click Yes, I am sure if you would like to go ahead and cancel your registration. You are now no longer registered for the Great Glossy Count. If you change your mind, you can register again at any time. Once you have registered, you will receive a confirmation email to confirm your registration. Make sure to check your junk mail folder if you haven't received anything. Step 3. Pass the quiz. Before you can book a site, you will need to pass our quiz. Click the Take Quiz button. If you're not ready to take the quiz or book a site yet, you can still view available sites by clicking the View Booking Map button. Click the Back button to return. To train for the quiz, you can go to bit.ly/glossyproject to access all of our resources, or you can click the link here. Once you have successfully passed the quiz, you can book a site. Click the View Booking Map button, and this will take you to the map where you can book a survey site. Step 4. Book a site. You can book a survey site on this map, or if you have a group booking code, you can enter your group booking code here and click Join Booking. To view sites, you will need to zoom in. You can do this by double-clicking the map, using the plus and minus symbols in the bottom right-hand corner, or by selecting an orange or grey cell. Once you are zoomed in, you can move around the map by clicking and dragging your cursor. You can zoom back out at any time. Orange grid cells represent available priority survey sites identified by BirdLife Australia and other individuals and organisations working to conserve glossy black cockatoos. These are there to help guide you in surveying a suitable site. If you are aware of a suitable location not marked as priority, you are most welcome to survey there instead. We have done our best to identify suitable priority survey sites, but cannot guarantee that all priority sites listed are accessible or suitable. Please use your best judgment if surveying a site at a location you have not been to before. Grey grid cells represent sites that are no longer available to book for that date. If a site is grey, you can try and select a different date in the calendar where it may be available. You can also check availability by clicking on the grid cell itself. The date will appear as red if it is unavailable and green if it is still available. Let's select this date for Sunday 10th of September. Select the date and click Book Site. Check that your details are correct and confirm that you are physically and medically fit to participate. Once you are happy to proceed, click the Confirm Booking button. You will receive an email confirming your booking. This will include a booking code that you can share with your friends so they can join you at your site. Let's copy this code. From the registration page, you can enter your group booking code and click Join Booking. This will prompt you to join the booking for that site. Now that we have booked our site booking details show up under My Bookings. If, for whatever reason, you can no longer survey this site or wish to change sites, click Cancel Booking. A prompt will appear to confirm that you wish to cancel your booking. Click OK, and our site is no longer booked. You can book a maximum of 4 sites per day using this method and manage all of your bookings from this registration page. Remember, the link is bit.ly/GlossyCount2023, or you can go to bit.ly/GlossyCount, where all our event information is, and then just click the Register and Book a Site for the Great Glossy Count button. If you have any questions on how to register or book a site in BirdData, just go to our event page at bit.ly/GlossyCount. From here, you can view our frequently asked questions about how to register for the event and book a site, or you can contact us at glossybc@birdlife.org.au or via our Contact Us form. Thank you and happy birding.
Thank you for playing that video, Ellie. She's just going to queue up the second video, which is going to help us learn more about how to log our sightings on the mobile BirdData app. Again, that's a lot of information in a short period of time, but we do have the video up on YouTube thanks to BirdLife Australia, and we've just popped that link in the chat. Also, acknowledgement to Laura Tan from BirdLife Australia, who did the voiceover for that video and pulled it together. Great job. She's also done the voiceover for the next video, which is how to log sightings on BirdData. So I'll throw to Ellie again. Remember, if you've got any questions, including about using BirdData, please pop them in the chat because we do have the team from BirdLife Australia online to help answer any questions. So back over to you, Ellie, for the second and final video.
Welcome to BirdLife Australia's guide on how to record glossy black-cockatoo sightings using BirdLife's BirdData app. Step 1. Log into BirdData. Download the BirdData app on your iOS or Android device and log in or create a new account. Step 2. Select the Southeastern Glossy Black-Cockatoo program. Once you are logged into BirdData, begin by pressing Record Survey, then select the Southeastern Glossy Black-Cockatoo program. Step 3. Record Survey Location. Under the Location tab, navigate to your point on the map by using your phone's GPS location or by dragging your finger across the screen to move the map. You can zoom in by pinching the screen. Tap and hold a point on the screen to create a new survey point. Then tap Record Survey here at the bottom of the screen. Step 4. Record Survey Details. Under the Details tab, check the start date and observation time of your survey are correct. Tap on them if you need to change them. If you are collecting data in a group, tap Number of Observers and select the number of people collecting data. Location accuracy is automatically set to Within Survey Area. If you survey more than 200 metres outside of your survey site, that is, your grid cell, tap Location Accuracy and select an option. Tap When did you arrive at your site/grid and enter the time that you arrived at your site/grid. Note, this is different from your observation time. If you are collecting data in a group, tap Additional Observers and enter the first and last names of the other group members. Tap Weather Conditions at Time of Observation and select the options that best describe your weather conditions. If Other is selected, specify the weather condition in the text box. For now, we'll select that the weather is fine. Tap Observer Experience (GBC) and select your level of experience collecting data on Glossy Black-Cockatoos. Tap Did you see Glossies drinking here and from what source? And select the options that best describe your observations during the survey. If Yes or Other was selected, specify the type of water source in the text box. If you observed she oaks, select Yes under Have you found any she oaks? Then record data on she oaks. This includes data on chewings and feed trees. If you did not observe she oaks, select No. If you would like to add any photos of she oaks, chewings, or water sources, tap the Add Photo box and select your images to upload. If you would like to record additional information about your site or survey, tap Comments and enter your notes. Step 5. Record data on she oaks and feed trees. If you answered yes to Have you found any she oaks, tap From where you were standing, roughly how many she oaks are around you. Select the category that best describes your observations during the survey. If you observed she oaks with cones, select Yes under Do any of the she oaks have cones? If you did not observe she oaks with cones, select No and proceed. If you observed any chewings or glossies feeding, select Yes under Do any of the she oaks with cones have chewings underneath them or glossies feeding in them? If you did not observe any chewings or glossies feeding, select No and proceed. If you answered yes to the above question, tap How many she oaks have chewings underneath them or glossies feeding in them, and select the category that best describes your observations during the survey. For she oaks with chewings or birds in them, tap Tree Species and select one option. If you tap the Help button in the top right-hand corner, this will bring up a list of the more common Glossy Black-Cockatoo feed tree species in your state. Tap Chewing Colours and select all options that apply. If there is only one type of chewing, just select one. If you observed more than one feed tree species, tap Add Tree Species and enter details of the additional species. If you are unsure, just tap Unsure for each category. When you are done, tap Done in the top right-hand corner, or Cancel to discard and go back. We'll keep these changes though. Once you have completed filling in the Details tab, tap Record Sightings at the bottom of the screen, or tap the Sightings tab at the top of the screen. If you have not observed a feed tree or glossy after 15 to 30 minutes of searching, that is, you have had 0 observations, this is still valuable data, Leave the Sightings tab blank, then tap Review and Submit. If you observed a glossy under the Sightings tab, tap the Search by Species name box at the top of the screen and select Glossy Black-Cockatoo. Next to count, enter in the number of glossies observed for a certain age, sex, or behaviour. Tap Sex and select one option. Note that you can tap the Help button in the top right-hand corner to quickly view the differences between a male and female glossy black cockatoo. Tap Age and select one option from the list. Tap Main Activity and select one option that best describes the activity the bird or birds spent most of their time engaged in. If you would like to record additional information, tap the text box under Notes and enter your notes there. If you have taken a photo of the bird, tap the Add Photo box and select your images to upload or take a photo using your camera. Tap the Done button in the top right-hand corner to save your observation. To add information on another bird of different age, sex, or behaviour, repeat the process by tapping in the Search by Species name box at the top of the screen and selecting Glossy Black Cockatoo. Let's add information on another bird. If you wish to remove an observation, swipe left against your sighting and then select Delete. To edit your observation, just tap the sighting row. From this screen, you can also change the number of birds you saw by tapping the plus and minus buttons. Since we deleted that last sighting, let's enter the correct details for this second bird. Step 7. Review and submit your data. Once you have finished entering data, tap Review and Submit at the bottom of your screen, or tap the Review tab at the top of the screen. Review your data to ensure you have entered it correctly. If you need to edit data, tap the relevant tabs: Location, Details, or Sightings, and make any amendments as necessary. When you are finished, go back to the Review tab and tap Submit Survey. Please note, if you submit your survey in the Bird Data app and later need to change any details, you can edit your survey using the web portal at birddata.birdlife.org.au. Once your survey is complete, it will show up on your Bird Data homepage. You can also check these details in the web portal later. Thank you and happy birding.
So thank you for your patience while we played those videos. They're essential for us to collect good data for the Great Glossy Count, and good data is essential for good decision making when it comes to conservation projects. And if you've been paying attention to the chat, Laura Tan, who's the Southeastern Glossy Black Cockatoo Project Officer with BirdLife Australia, has popped a link in there to give you some insights into how data from the Great Glossy Count will actually be used in practical terms. So please check that out. I would like to introduce our panelists in just a moment, when they turn their videos on especially. So on the panel this evening, and we've already met Dr. Daniella, so I will not introduce her again. I would like to introduce Mike Barth, who no doubt will turn his video on very soon. Mike. Mike studied ecology and wildlife biology in California, and you can still hear his accent, where he grew up and has always had a passion for nature, especially birds. His specialty is threatened bird conservation. G'day, Mike. And his career spans over 25 years working with birds on 2 continents. Most recently, he worked on Kangaroo Island on the South Australian Glossy Black Cockatoo Recovery Program for 12 years. He's a relatively new recruit to Southeast Queensland and also to the Glossy Black Conservancy. So thank you, Mike, for joining us on the panel tonight. I would also like to introduce Jessica Rooke. G'day, Jessica. Jessica has a passion for wildlife and conservation, which started when she received a copy of the Slater Field Guide to Australian Birds at age 4. I think many of us can lay claim to that, but perhaps not at the age of 4. Jessica undertook her tertiary education at the University of New South Wales, where she received the University Medal for her Bachelor degree of Advanced Science with honours in Biological Science and Ecology. Her thesis pioneered research on the ecology of the yellow-tailed black cockatoo around Sydney and was featured in the Sydney Morning Herald, Australian Geographic, and on ABC National Radio. So maybe we should call you the pin-up girl for yellow-tailed black cockatoos alongside Danny. Now Jessica has been a professional ecologist for 10 years, working in the not-for-profit, consulting and university sectors in threatened species conservation. She is currently the New South Wales Threatened Species Coordinator at BirdLife Australia, where she works on a variety of projects to protect some of Australia's most threatened birds, including the southeastern glossy black cockatoo. She is known for her enthusiasm and passion and is recognised for her strong drive to achieve positive outcomes in conservation, biodiversity management, and community engagement. So thank you so much for joining us, our fabulous panel. I didn't properly introduce myself at the start. So my name is Samantha Morris. I am not on the screen for some reason, but I'll work out how to, you don't need to see me. I am actually the coordinator for the Glossy Black Conservancy, a role that I've had for around 2 years or so. But it's not the only role I have in conservation. I work with a number of land management, natural resource management, and outback advocacy organisations in communication and engagement roles. And I mostly help these groups communicate with their audiences to achieve outcomes for our most precious plants, animals, and wild places. So my job tonight is simply to keep the conversation going and to make sure we finish before the Matildas kick off. Everyone's on board for that. In fact, I asked our brand new president of the Glossy Black Conservancy, who is behind the scenes tonight, if he would like to wrap up this evening, and he said, good Lord, no, everybody wants to finish on time. Do not give me any microphone time. So everyone is on the same page. While we're acknowledging people, I just also want to acknowledge Elli Webb from the Glossy Black Conservancy and Laura Tan from BirdLife Australia, who are supporting us behind the scenes in the chat and the Q&A function tonight. So again, if you've got any questions, pop them in the chat. And anything we don't answer tonight, once again, we will answer on our Facebook page. And if you have asked a question in the chat, we will come to it shortly. So I wanted to start with Danny, who has already had some airtime. But bushfires have had a really huge impact on glossy habitat. Can you tell us about some of the specific impacts that these natural disasters have had on this species?
Yeah, that's a big question. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, I mean, the Black Summer bushfires were a really catastrophic event. There's no two ways about it. Some of the impacts, of course, we have direct mortality of the birds in some cases, but we have some really, really interesting data in a few places that showed that the birds can actually sort of move out of the areas that are directly impacted by these fires. So they were turning up in places that they weren't seen previously. I think the best example of that was a couple of birds were spotted all the way on the Mornington Peninsula, like nearly in Melbourne, which is several hundred kilometres further south than they normally occurred. So yes, there's potentially direct impacts of birds dying during those fires. Absolutely, that's a concern. But probably the big concern is the impact to the habitat. So she oaks are really interesting. So like I said in my talk, there's a lot of different species of she oak. And we can't sort of get into the details today, but some of those species are more fire tolerant and some are less fire tolerant. And what's really, tricky but important to understand for she oaks, as well as many plants in Australia, is that there's sort of the sweet spot of some fire is absolutely needed, too much fire is bad. So trying to find that balance is the key point here. So we often, you know, in the aftermath of Black Summer, we're talking about bushfires in a really, really negative way. These catastrophic events had dire consequences, including for the glossy black cockatoo. But what we don't want to do now is completely exclude fire. We've got data from Kangaroo Island, for instance. A student of mine a couple of years ago looked into this, where the trees, the she oaks that had experienced no fire in over 60 years were no longer a good habitat for the glossy black cockatoos. The birds could no longer feed there. The trees are not really producing any food for them. And that's because fire has been completely excluded from those patches. So the fire managers have a really tricky balance to kind of strike. I think the other thing is that these sort of events can lead to habitat fragmentation, which basically is chopping up the landscape into little bits and pieces. And, you know, birds you may think, you know, they can fly, that it's not going to impact them so badly, but we don't really understand what those impacts of habitat fragmentation are. So that's a big unknown. That's something we'd love to look into. And I think the other obvious thing is the impact to breeding habitat. I mean, if a nesting tree is destroyed in a hot fire, that can't easily be replaced. She oaks will grow back. They can, you know, unlike some other trees, they can grow back very quickly. They can produce food within, say, 5 to 10 years. For glossies, they can be back. But a hollow bearing tree for nesting, no chance. That's hundreds and hundreds of years in the making. And simply whacking up a nest box may not cut it.
Thanks, Danny. Jessica, of course, bushfires didn't just impact glossies. What do we know about how other Australian birds are faring across the board with these climate disasters?
Very good question, Sam, and thanks everyone and welcome, and thanks for joining us tonight. It's really inspiring for all of us here to see so many people excited about our beloved glossies. Another big question, Sam, I'll do my best to answer. As Danny kind of touched on before, bushfire, especially at the scale and intensity that we saw of the 2019-20 Black Summer bushfires, can impact Australia's birds in many ways. Apart from loss of life, birds, and particularly our native species, can become more vulnerable to predation, especially by introduced species such as feral cats and foxes. Large herbivores such as feral deer and pigs can also damage and destroy vegetation regrowth, and that impedes the recovery of that habitat. And as Danny also touched on, loss of nesting resources such as hollow-bearing trees, and also foraging resources such as fruit, nectar, and seeds also have adverse effects on our birds. But in the aftermath of the 2019-20 bushfires, BirdLife and numerous other environmental organisations worked quickly to conduct analyses of these fires and identify a priority list of birds requiring urgent management action. So this included birds like the Regent honeyeater, eastern bristlebird, western ground parrot, and of course our beloved glossy black cockatoos. So there are a variety of different projects, programs, and people that are driving the recovery of our bushfire affected birds. And recovery actions, for example, can look like community bird surveys to help monitor bird recovery, community engagement and education to help raise awareness, even radio tracking some of our birds to help us better understand post-fire behaviour and ecology, and also advocacy, which can look like getting species uplisted and added to the threatened species list. And if you wanted to learn more about what BirdLife is doing for bushfire recovery, you can look at our works and projects on the BirdLife Australia website.
Thanks, Jessica. A lot of the actions that you just mentioned there are really around monitoring birds in the wild. And Mike has been doing just that out in the field, spending hundreds and hundreds of hours doing acoustic monitoring and a bunch of other stuff, collecting data on glossy black cockatoos. What have you observed in the field, Mike?
I think one thing I can say is it varies region by region. And so another thing that I'm surprised about are the kind of low numbers of glossies in all the areas I've worked in. And so I've come from Kangaroo Island, where I knew where I could find any flock of glossies on the island. And now I'm over here on the East Coast for the last, it's coming up on 2 years. And here they're really sparse in the landscape. And I think it has to do with like a real variability in the food, in the feeding habitat. And another thing I guess I've seen is that a lot of the forests on the eastern coast of Australia have been altered in the past. So a lot of logging has taken place in the past. So what we see now is a lot of secondary forests. So a lot of the big hollow bearing trees are gone from the landscape. And so I think glossies are resilient and they're making do with what's left and what we've got. But yeah, I think we need to help them as best we can and find out, why their numbers are low, and do what we can to assist them. And that's my job. I'm out there recording on a daily basis what I see and reporting it to everyone that can make a difference.
Thanks, Mike. A couple of questions around ID in the chat for any of you. From Eric, wanted to know, does the colour of a glossy black cockatoo's beak play any role in terms of helping to identify sex or age?
There's a general consensus that the first year birds have a lighter colored bill than adults. But other than that, I can't really say much about beak color. It's all about plumage.
That is a thing with red-tailed black cockatoos, though. The females have that really light, like ivory colored bill. So yeah, it's interesting because it's like so closely related taxonomically. But yeah, glossies don't seem to have that dimorphism.
And it's the same for yellowtails as well. So the males will have a kind of charcoaly upper mandible in their bill, where the females are completely, as Danny said, an ivory or white colour.
And an interesting comment which has come through from Leanne, who says, firstly, she's really stoked to be learning so much tonight. She says she's got a forest full of she oaks and found it interesting that the male she oaks don't produce cones. She recently recorded all of the glossy black cockatoo data that she's observed on her property this winter, and they drink from a small dam in Billabong and sleep there most nights. But what she's interested in is that wanted to find out if the cockatoos get along with galahs, because she found that when just 2 galahs fly in, the whole flock of 9 glossy black cockatoos fly further into the bushland away from them. But she's observed that they will tolerate gang cockatoos and other bird species. So have any of you had any observations of those interactions in the field?
One thing I do know is that galahs are one of the few cockatoos that defend their nest hollow year round. Even though when they're not nesting, they'll still hang around and defend it. And on Kangaroo Island, we've had instances where they harass the glossies at the nest hollow. And so maybe they are a bit of a competitor to glossies, and the glossies know this.
Danny, you had any observations of these interactions?
A bit of anecdote, but it's an area that we really don't know all that much about. I think some of the more interesting things I've seen is like a glossy hanging out with yellowtails. And you're like, case of mistaken identity, like what's happening here? But no, we don't have a good sense of how those multi-species interactions really play out. I've certainly seen, and Mike, you would have seen this on KI, like where they do try and defend themselves sometimes, but they, like I said in my talk, they're quiet, they're not that boisterous in their behavior, so they tend to kind of just get out of the way of all the other cockatoos like galahs, which are that really cockatoo stereotypical kind of species that's just loud and boisterous and bold and all of those things that glossies aren't.
We've got quite a few questions about feed trees, which I'll come to in a moment, but a question from Motria, who asked whether glossy black cockatoos are affected by heat stress.
Mike or Jess, step in if you have any good idea. Like the default would be yes. We know like lots of birds are affected by heat stress. I have no data on this specifically for glossies, but I did look into this for my work on red-tailed black cockatoos. I think it was last summer or the summer before when there was severe heat waves down in Victoria. And we were worried that the nests we were monitoring would all die during that event. And they didn't. And that includes the natural nest hollows as well as the artificial hollows, which was the main concern because they wouldn't be as insulated. So don't know about glossies. I think it's definitely a cause for concern though with climate change. But again, not something we have a handle on.
I think luckily glossies nest more autumn into winter. And so it's the summer nesting birds like yellowtails, maybe the carnabees, I don't know when they nest, but anything nesting in summer when you're going to get those big heat waves, they're going to be vulnerable to that. Yeah.
And that's sorry, this isn't directly in response to that question, but Mike, that's a really good point to raise. Like when those black summer fires were happening on KI, one of the things that we were talking about was like, as tragic and unfortunate as that event was in terms of the glossies, the fact that it wasn't their breeding season was a saving grace for them, because had they been tied to their nests, that would have been far, far worse.
And there were yellowtail blacks nesting during that pretty tragic for those birds that were nesting in some of the same hollows that glossies nest in. We found evidence that they didn't make it.
And I think this is a question for you, Jessica. Judy's asked in the Q&A whether other black cockatoos leave similar traces of feeding when using casuarinas, and if so, can you distinguish glossy feeding remains from other red-tailed or other cockatoos?
Oh, fantastic question, Judy. Thank you for asking. So yes, you can. So yes, other species of black cockatoo and just parrots in general can feed on sheoaks, so alocasuarinas and casuarinas, but we can distinguish between glossy black cockatoo chewings or orts and the chewings and orts of other parrot species. So glossy black cockatoos, because they predominantly only feed on sheoaks, will eat the entire cone. So the chewings left over are what we call disc-shaped, whereas other parrots, when they chew these cones, they leave what we kind of describe as an apple core shape. And one of the other biggest distinguishing factors is because glossies are predominantly feeding on the sheoaks, and especially their preferred feed trees, you'll often find an absolute carpet of chewings underneath these trees. So that's another great way to distinguish whether it's a glossy or another bird that has been feeding.
Lots of questions about feed trees. So Mary says that she has two types of sheoaks, the forest sheoak and the river sheoak. Will glossy black cockatoos feed on both?
You go,
Danny?
Mike.
Who wants to go?
We both turned our mics off at the same time. You go.
Definitely forest sheoak, so the Alocasuarina tortuosa. The river sheoak, not so much. They're gigantic trees along the river corridors, like in northern New South Wales, but they have tiny little cones, and they're not a known feed tree for glossies. Yeah.
Danny, you want to add to that?
Nope, that's what I was going to say.
So another question from staff wants to know how often sheoak trees produce seeds for glossies. Is it annual? Is it dependent on weather? And are you able to age the trees themselves? Mike and Danny, you're going to have to arm wrestle to answer these questions.
I feel like I'm no plant ecologist. I'm no sheer specialist, so my
I've
knowledge is
been
fairly
looking at a
limited.
lot of she oaks in the last 2 years up here and monitoring them year round. And so, yes, all I can say is that it varies every year. I think it depends, on rainfall, and when the rain happens. But I think also the birds themselves, the glossies, they're tuned in to the timing of when the cones are fully developed. And so they are tuned in and switching over to different species of she oaks within their home range, when the food comes online.
And I think water, like rain and access to water, is probably really, really important. Sometimes you can see a stand of she oak where the females don't have many cones, but then there may be a couple of trees near like a stormwater drain or something, and they're full. Yeah. They're absolute chockers.
Yeah.
So I think water is really important. And again, thinking about the impacts of climate change and drought, that's a huge concern.
And dependent on the she oak species itself. Again, not a botanist, but yeah, it definitely depends on the she oak species. And as Danny and Mike have both said, the growing conditions, habitat conditions, environmental conditions as well.
Catherine Madden, who's a member of the Glossy Black Conservancy, has just jumped into the chat and says that she and Don Sands have had a conversation about this, and he said that there are insects within main feed trees that provide more protein. So that's why glossies will target or favour particular trees, is that they may have insects. Do you know more about that, any of you?
Not so much. I know when we were doing some of our she oak research on KI a few years ago, we did come across quite a few insects in the cones themselves. Whether or not the glossies like that or don't, I'm not sure.
Yeah, I'm just adding to that. It hasn't been a lot of, well, there has been quite a lot of research, but I guess we haven't gotten solid answers yet. So as Danny said, there's been research looking into feed tree fidelity, and just hot off the press, I'm also aware of ANU currently starting a project looking at the chemical compounds in she oak seeds and cones to see whether that makes a difference and why particular trees are favoured over others.
A question from Stephen, who is lucky enough to have a kilometre of creekline on his place, full of she oaks and known habitat for glossies. He's very active on his property and wants to know whether all of that activity will scare glossies away, or will they get used to him and hang around?
Hanging around glossies for 13 years now, I do know that they are very tolerant of people, more so than a lot of other cockatoos out there, or other birds even. And so, yeah, if you're gonna do the right thing and plant trees for them, then I think they're gonna be happy about that, and there's no need to worry.
I mean, they're pretty loud and make quite a disturbance themselves, right?
Yeah, they do appreciate plantings, and so she oaks that are out in the open, spaced apart, that get big full canopies, and lots of cones on them, they're going to enjoy that.
And we've only got about 5 more minutes of questions because football. Some quick questions, hopefully with some easy answers. What is the best time of day when people go out to survey on the 9th and 10th of September? What is the best time of day to go out and observe glossies?
Short answer, anytime. Anytime is a good time to get out there and collect data on glossies. And glossies behaviour kind of varies across the day as well. So in general, a lot of the birding community say around dawn and dusk. And for glossies, this might increase your chances of seeing them, because around dawn and dusk, they're likely to form these larger flocks. while during the day, while you still have a chance to see them, that's when they're predominantly foraging. So they might be quietly foraging away. But short answer, anytime.
Yep. Danny and Mike, any time of day, good time to go out and see glossies. We've got a question from Sarah about the best place to site Glossy Black-Cockatoos on the Gold Coast. And Sarah, if you shoot us an email after this, we'll send you some information about that. Now, there are two questions that I wanted to wrap up the panel with which are kind of connected. And one is from Sarah, who says, once we've sighted Glossy Black-Cockatoos, what can we do to protect them? And the other is from Montreal. So we know that one of the biggest threats to the survival of Glossy Black-Cockatoos is land clearing, especially for urban developments. Montreal is in Bermagui in New South Wales, and she says she's been watching them in a forest which is earmarked for a housing development. And she's asked specifically, what can she do to support the birds? Is it realistic to plant she oaks in her small urban garden? So how I wanted to wrap up the panel, and obviously BirdLife Australia and Glossy Black Conservancy are both organisations which are working on better policy and better planning frameworks to support Glossy Black-Cockatoos and other birds. But from the work that you've all done, what are some actions that everyday people can take to ensure the survival of Glossy Black-Cockatoos? So I'll start with you, Jessica, and then I'll go to Mike and then Danny.
Fantastic question. And I think it's from the little things to the big things. So some small things, if you are able to, planting she oaks, especially if you have a larger property, is a fantastic thing to do to supplement the natural resources that are currently there. And it will take about 5 years for those she oaks to become established as well. Also, just contacting your local members and sending letters, getting involved in your local organisations, but truly even just having a conversation with those nearest and dearest to you. I'm assuming everyone here online is a bird nerd to be here, but a lot of people, even in our own personal lives, aren't, and they might not even know about Glossy Black-Cockatoos and that they're threatened. So I'd encourage you to even just talk to those around you, talk to those in the community, and get them to be as passionate as you are about conserving our beloved Glossy Black-Cockatoos.
Thanks, Jessica. Mike, do you have anything to add? What can we do to protect these birds?
I think one thing that's important is just submitting your sighting records and stuff, because right now we're still learning how many are out there and where they are. And so that's kind of a key to conservation of this species, is knowledge. And so we're also on a mission to find out what's happening at the nest. So part of my mission has been locating as many nests as I can and find out what's happening at the nest and what the threats are. And so if people are reporting sightings that tell us there's nesting behavior, we want to follow that up. Anyway, that's my spiel.
Thanks, Mike. And Danny?
Yeah, just to reiterate what Jess and Mike both said, I think they're all really important. As you know, individually, it can sometimes feel like there's not a whole lot that you can do. And I think, there's different layers of complexity to this question. And I think we, scientists like myself have one job and all of that. Anyway, I think the key point that I wanted to make is, now that the southeastern subspecies is federally listed, this is an opportunity. And reporting your sightings is going to become more and more important, and getting those into publicly accessible databases, because now for any new developments that get proposed, if they're going to be impacting on Glossy Black-Cockatoo habitat, there will be some level of assessment. And if the people assessing those development applications don't have access to that sightings data in that patch of habitat, if there's no records of glossies having used that habitat, their assessment of the impacts to glossies will be very different. if you actually can confirm that glossies have been seen there. And like Mike said, with regards to the breeding season, having a date attached to your sightings is really, really useful, because then we can understand whether those impacts would be to them feeding and or breeding. And that will change then how those developments are then assessed and permitted. So I think definitely do what you can, get your sightings into bird data. And I think Laura shared a link to how is bird data used. That's the best thing that we can possibly do, just as an individual. And yeah, just like Jess said as well, if you can plant trees, wonderful. But the main thing that we need to be doing is stopping the clearing of habitat, and sightings can help do that.
And this is why the Great Glossy Count is such an important event, because we're only a few people in the room, but if we can get as many people as participating as possible and recording their sightings together, we're going to make a difference.
Thank you so much to our fabulous panelists. I know when I started working with the Glossy Black Conservancy, and I've worked in conservation for 30 years, I was nearly overwhelmed with the brain power sitting around that table, and not just the scientific knowledge, but the heart that these scientists and academics and consultants were bringing to the conservation of Glossy Black Cockatoos. Thank you all for joining us tonight. In the chat, you'll notice that we have popped a link for an evaluation form, and we would love if you could take just a couple of minutes to complete that now. It will only take 60 seconds, I promise. The other thing I'm popping in the chat right now is a link to register for the Great Glossy Count, because we neglected to do that earlier. So the count takes place on the 9th and 10th of September, all across the range of the southeastern Glossy Black Cockatoo. We encourage you to do that. I promised we'd finish. I'm not going to babble on. Everyone's already saying gotta go, game starting. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Go the Matildas. Again, thank you to our panelists, to Laura and Elli behind the scenes. And we look forward to seeing all of your fabulous sightings data come in the next couple of weeks. We'll be in touch by email with all of the links that were shared tonight. Good night, everybody.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Good luck. Bye.